Hi there, and welcome back to my channel. We are continuing on with our book study for this month. It is Eager to Love by Richard Rohr, and it is a study of I guess you would call it the background of the Franciscan order. St. Francis is attributed to having organized this group of monks, but he actually was against this idea of an organization. But that being said, the Franciscan order took on a lot of his tenets to create this group of monks and the organizational structure of their community. And so I thought it'd be interesting to look through and try to understand on a deeper level what St. Francis brought to the world in the way we view God. Because many people know about St. Francis of Assisi and have probably seen statues and know that he's attributed with walking in nature and having a love of nature, but not really understanding the mindset or the journey he took to get there. So what I'm doing is this online book discussion where I'm reading through the book, and I'm also giving you 2 or 3 questions with each reading. It's about 10 to 20 pages of reading, and then 2 or 3 questions that you can use as this starting point to be able to just really think more deeply about the way St. Francis viewed the world and how God spoke through him, and if you're seeing it in your local church or in the way that you are engaging with God. So we are on chapter 4 and actually finishing that up. We're going to be looking at pages 52 through 60. And then I will share the questions with you. It'll be in a PDF form, free for you to download, and use as your starting point either for your own pondering and quiet time, or to share with a group of friends or your church group or anyone who you feel might benefit from having a conversation like this. My desire is to constantly be watching for the way God is moving in the world, and more specifically, if I am seeing him through the proper lenses, or if I'm stuck in some sort of old thinking that really doesn't line up with the way God's moving in the world, right? And don't we need that? We need to make sure that we're understanding that without even noticing it, we put God in a box. It is our box. And then God begins to look like us. What I mean is, God begins to have the same opinions as I do. Well, we know that's not true. We know that cannot be true. And if we don't know that, we really do have a problem, because we do not hold all the world in our hearts and in our minds as God has said he does, which is he loves all. And so when you start with that premise, you must understand that you will have to contend with some thinking that you've taken on due to hurts, due to disappointments, due to sadness and tragedy that comes through our lives, because it does inevitably. But how will we then go back to the Father and say, change my mind again, Lord, change my mind again? All right, so let's get started. We are starting at page 52. And again, you can just listen along, or you can pick up the book and read along with me. So I'm starting at the section called On the Road, Not in the Monastery. Nevertheless, despite the fading of the Franciscan emphasis on the sacramentality of nature, we have always been, to a certain degree, non-churchy when compared to many church groups, while still integrated with the social phenomenon of church, community, and ordinary neighborhood life. Transcend and include is the mature principle here. We let the church hold us in place and then move out from there. Franciscans at their best attempted to live inside the universal mystery of church, and from there we went out to serve the world. Most Christians got it backward by living in the world and occasionally going to church. I believe there is a creative tension between solid ground and the larger horizons we can see. Franciscan spirituality is a sidewalk spirituality for the streets of the world and the paths of the forest. It is not primarily based in the monastery, in church buildings, or in any asceticism or celibacy, despite all of our attempts to confine it there. Scholars who have done a day-by-day study of Francis's early biographies have concluded that he lived a very small part of his year in actual community. This was shocking to those of us trained exclusively in what has become monastic community. This was the subject of my bachelor's thesis in 1965. Francis spent most of his time on the road and in the woods for Lents, hermitages, island solitudes, and traveling between towns. He seems to have traversed central and scenic Italy many times, visiting scores of towns. He also went to Syria, Egypt, and Spain with one or two others. It does not seem he had much time for community as we now think of it. Rather, his life illustrated the 2 or 3 gathered in my name that was Jesus' first definition of church. After the initial golden age where the friars lived in wattles and woods, most of later Franciscan history rested on a strange 3-legged tripod, as Franciscan Sister Ilia Delio puts it. The theology after the Council of Trent belonged to Thomas Aquinas, not Bonaventure or John Duns Scotus. The form of life belonged to St. Benedict. We called our friaries monasteries until my early years. While the charism, that is our animating spirit, was still romantically held by Francis. But we had neither the learned experience nor the living structures to communicate our unique charism with any distinctive vitality or message. Franciscan men became mostly priests of the church, women either teachers or nurses for church institutions, and these gave us our primary identity and security. All fine, but not uniquely Franciscan or on the edge of the inside. We were fully inside. Pluses and minuses. My early formation circled around monastic choir obligations instead of any risky itineraries that took me out into nature or any urban plunges, as we later called them. Most of my professors were academics, and I am deeply grateful for all they taught me. But now I am aware of what they did not teach me because they did not know it or enjoy it themselves. Few of them would have been at home among the poor or the outcast, or camping out. I remember my disappointment when I was severely reprimanded by a friar professor for picking up a hitchhiker as I drove the professor home from the airport. I had expected him to praise me. What was originally on the edge had been co-opted to the conformist center. I encourage you to read the first gospel descriptions of Jesus' sending of his disciples, and to ask you how we Franciscans got from this vulnerable life on the road to the ascribed status and security we enjoy today, and which is so lethal for the male psyche and spirit. One Franciscan professor of mine said that the rule of St. Francis could basically be described as tips for the road in comparison to the beautiful rule of St. Benedict, which is guidance and plan for a stable community. As G.K. Chesterton put it, what Benedict stored, Francis scattered. Francis's approach is much riskier and has frankly led to a lot of Franciscan life that has had little discipline, clear direction, or proper boundaries. We were seldom authoritarian, but that only works if you support it with true mentorship, eldering, and strongly internalized values. In my experience, the young ego is often left unformed and unchallenged, and there have been many human and spiritual casualties as a result. This gift of freedom makes formation into such a lifestyle rare and much more difficult, and much more dependent on healthy bottles and elders on site, which is frankly rare. Monastic stability and structure has the real edge here. You need to find a strong container in the first half of your life, and Franciscan men, by our very love of freedom, often fail to provide that container. We are often so afraid of being authoritarian that we fail to be elders, guides, and real spiritual fathers to the young who want that very thing, usually without knowing it. And then they leave disillusioned. So our Franciscan strength may also be our weaknesses. Ignatius of Loyola later tried to bring inner discipline and self-initiative to religious life, with many good results. If a Franciscan does not strongly internalize his or her vocation, our way of life is highly open to whimsy, floating, and unfettered egocentricity in the name of gospel freedom. Francis called such friars drones and vagabonds and encouraged them to change or leave. Did you ever notice that it is usually friars' smiling faces that are put on wine and beer bottles? And their rotund, brown-robed figures are often made into happy, pot-bellied cookie jars and cartoon characters? What a telling public image we seem to enjoy. Franciscanism has always been ethos or spirit, more than rule or schedule, which is good but also dangerous for those who are lazy, unconverted, or unmotivated. If you do not really meet and fall in love with Jesus, you can largely live for yourself and still think of this as a religious life. Even the vow of poverty can create a well-disguised welfare state that encourages codependency and discourages personal responsibility and initiative. Gospel freedom is always a risk, and only the mature can handle it well. Chapter 3 of Francis's Rule of 1223 totally assumes an itinerant worldview going about the world, and never riding horseback, a mode of travel that was for the rich at his time. He advised the friars that whatever house you enter, say peace to this house, or eat whatever is set before you. There were no dietary rules either, just as in the Gospels, but only enjoying whatever table the Lord provides. Except that Francis himself ate far too little. It was only at the end of his life that he spoke joyfully to his body and asked Brother Body for forgiveness with the firm promise that he would now give heed to his complaints. Begging, which was central to the first Franciscans, implied being among the people and identified with the bottom and not the top, living in the cities and working with laborers in farms and towns, in a role of neediness rather than being needed ourselves. This sense of need deeply affects the soul when you are the receiver instead of always being the giver. University settings, huge churches, and large monastery buildings came much later, but would have been abhorrent to the first generation, as we see in Francis's violent reactions to the tiled friaries the brothers tried to build in Bologna at the Portiuncula. Friars were to be different than monks, and friaries inspired a different lifestyle than monasteries, not based on schedule and order, but on personal contact with ordinary people, ongoing conversion, and concrete works of service for those who could not pay us back. But of course, that does not pay the bills or sustain institutions. Such vulnerability is much harder to teach, model, or perpetuate. It has always left us in a very fragile position in terms of passing on our charism, as I think we are experiencing now, just when the world needs us so much. Recovering the heart of Franciscanism. But it is still ours to rediscover and re-energize our own Franciscan charism, as Vatican II exactly and directly told us to do. The religious sisters of all orders seem to be doing it the best, and this is probably why they have recently been such a threat to those who define faith as certitude, nostalgia, or the maintaining of social order. The true gospel always leaves us fragile and vulnerable, or as Jesus said, as sheep among wolves. Yet this is exactly what the world expects and once from Franciscans for what Jesus freed us and for what Jesus freed us. So we cannot lose heart. I find that people today are quite ready to hear messages of simplicity, nonviolence, humility, structural insecurity, love of animals and enemies, and even expect basic earth care from us. In fact, they are deeply disappointed when we are merely priests in brown robes who reflect current cultural values, upward mobility, and church more than gospel. I was once told that 2 Christian groups carry the least negative baggage in Western civilization: Franciscans and Quakers. When Patrick Carillon, who is the executive director of the Franciscan Action Network, spoke at the United Nations in June 2013, the avowed communist who chaired the international meeting said warmly and publicly in conclusion, "And may God bless you for your good work." Murmuring and surprise filled the General Assembly because the word God is seldom used in formal sessions at the UN. In fact, it is almost verboten. Yet a secular Franciscan spokesman who was humbly talking on climate change and jobs for the poor called forth this amazing response from a formal unbeliever. That is Franciscan evangelization. Not preaching at or to people, but just making the truth beautiful, attractive, and warm. If Franciscans go back to our contemplative, simple living and peacemaking foundations, we might again look like the Catholic version of the Quakers and the Amish, who often look like we initially looked, it seems to me. The world expects and longs for a truly unique, positive, and inviting message from the children of St. Francis. I have found this to be true without exception on all continents where I have taught and preached. They are disappointed when we are just like everyone else, and a lazy conformity has again won out over the revolutionary character of the gospel. When I am introduced as a priest, as an American, as a man, as educated, there are the usual Blake unexpected stares and often bored resignation. But the moment the speaker says, "He is a Franciscan," faces turn toward me and light up with some kind of hope and often even smile. This is really true. We must not be robbed of such a straight path and an open highway. It invites us and allows us to do much good in our world, far beyond our actual numbers or importance. That's the end of chapter 4. A lot to think about there, right? We can't get away from this notion that these labels bring information into the brain. And so when we decide to choose a particular label to associate with, we understand that it comes with the baggage, good or bad. So I hope and I trust that this will continue to challenge you, that as you take on labels, that you also let go of other labels and invite others into conversations as to why you chose certain labels for yourself and for your belief and understanding of God. So here's the questions for this group of pages. Number 1, church as the large corporate structure versus church as 2 to 3 people in Christ's name. Discuss your feelings, offenses that arise, your personal view, your experiences with this, your positions, pros or con, to such an understanding of the church. And then number 2, what are your thoughts on gospel freedom? Where do you see your life inhabiting this fully? All right, my friends, thanks so much for stopping by. Please let me know if this is something that you find is bringing value. Right now, we've just finished up chapter 4, and I'm happy to kind of let this series go, and you can kind of go on as you like, and maybe there's another book that I could just start getting the ball rolling on. But yeah, let me know in the comments if there's anything of interest you would like to have as part of a book discussion on this channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Bye.